Hello, friends. My name is Ihor Havrishchak. This is the YouTube channel of the 24th, live broadcast. So please like, subscribe, comment, and share the conversation. It is important for YouTube's algorithms to make more people aware of what is happening on the front line, in Syria, in Israel, and how it relates to Turkey. We will be assisted by an Israeli political scientist, Professor Zeev Khanin. I would like to start with how we can assess what has happened in Syria. What is happening in Syria? They are trying, as I understand it, to create a buffer zone for the buffer zone, if I may say so, near the Golan Heights. The most interesting thing, Mr. Zeev, that I feel now is Erdogan's message. He said that Damascus and other cities will become provinces of Turkey. This is, in fact, a review of all decisions since the First World War. To what extent is this the opening of the Pandora's box, and what is Russia's position in this regard? I understand that Putin has lost the game in terms of withdrawal of troops. I understand that Turkey is being ironic, saying that it can help withdraw them, but only if Russia asks it to. In such a case, they say that it is a $1 million question, but in truth, it is a many $1-million question. If you allow me, I will continue in Russian. In fact, the situation here is as follows. Syria has long been a state with reduced subjectivity.
Якщо ваша ласка, я продовжу російською, на самом деле ситуація тут такая. Сирия давно уже является государством с пониженной субъектностью.
The previous Syrian government did not decide anything. In fact, it was a protectorate of Iran. Today, a new government consisting of different rebel groups came to power. The main role is played by two: radical Islamists, formerly part of Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, and Turkey, which is their patron. Also, the second most important group is the pro-Turkish militias, the so-called Lebanese National Army. The Syrian National Army, or the Syrian National Army. This is a de facto militia that is trained, supplied, supported, and covered by the Turks. Thus, instead of an Iranian protectorate, there could be a Turkish protectorate on Israel's northeastern borders. Turkey, as they used to say in Odessa, offers an interesting choice between plague and cholera. At this stage, it is clear that Turkey is interested in de facto detaching from Syria some of the provinces to which it has laid claim. This is a long-standing conflict and a subject of dispute between Turkey and Syria since World War I, when the demarcation took place. The Turks have long claimed, since the time of Ataturk, that certain historical provinces have been taken away from them. Plus, without asking anyone, Erdogan is already establishing a significant sterile zone or security zone on the borders between Turkey and Syria, or rather, at the expense of Syrian territory. That's an understandable point. But there is another interesting point there. In the northeast are the Kurds, the Kurdish party, which Ankara considers to be a branch of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, a terrorist group declared in Turkey. These are movements that fight for the independence of Kurdistan, for the unification of the various Kurdish territories of Syria, eastern Turkey, and above all, the part of northern Iraq. It is clear that Mr. Erdogan, to put it mildly, is not enthusiastic about these kinds of ideas. It presumes to act in ways characteristic of radical Islamist groups. The very government of the Freedom and Justice Party, Mr. Erdogan's party, once moderate, is now increasingly radicalized into a radical version of the Muslim Brotherhood. So nothing good can be expected in that sense. It is clear that, anticipating your next question, Israel cannot look at this calmly.
Так что ничего хорошего в этом смысле ожидать не предполагается. Понятно,
About Israel.
Предваряя ваш следующий вопрос, понятно, что спокойно на это Израиль смотреть не может.
Ну, власне, про Ізраїль. В ніч на 14 грудня Ізраїль знову ж таки наніс
On the night of June 14th, Israel again launched airstrikes against Syrian positions. It has been doing so from the very beginning, when the rebels launched their offensive. As in Iran, they demolished PGOs, including S-300 and S-400 divisions. Having completely destroyed the Iranian PPG, the rebels launched their offensive in Syria, as Iran was weakened and Hezbollah was half destroyed. Erdogan said that Turkey may shoot down the Ivorian Air Force if Israel continues strikes on Syria. The question arises as to how the situation between Israel and Turkey may escalate. Erdogan's statements are often populist, and he calls Israel an enemy, particularly during the confrontations with Hamas in the Gaza Strip. At the beginning of the fall, when Israel destroyed Hezbollah, Erdogan said that the next target would be Turkey. He asserted that after Lujivan, Israel would launch attacks on Turkey. How realistic is this? That's a very good question. Let's start with the first warning or threat voiced by Erdogan to Israel. Was that Turkish troops had already been instructed to confront and shoot down Israeli planes if they were covering Kurdish rebels. This can be seen, as you note, as a demand that goes far beyond the scope of this statement. In fact, we are talking about closing the Syrian skies to the Israeli Air Force. As you correctly point out, Israel has already conducted a number of operations to destroy colossal stockpiles of weapons. At one time, Syria was stuffed with these weapons, Iranian, Russian, and so on. Syria has been a powerful conduit for Hezbollah's arms transportation to Lebanon, the area now occupied by Israeli troops behind the Aleph Zone, the international sterile zone from which international forces fled at the start of the Arab Spring in 2011 or 2012. Interestingly, they decided to seek refuge in Israel, considering it the safest place. Today, this channel of transportation of weapons, as well as drugs, remains important. Let's not forget that Lebanese Hezbollah is not only an armed group, which was the largest non-state army in the world. After the Israel Defense Forces destroyed 3/4 of its capabilities, it can no longer be called an army, but rather a militia. Yet Hezbollah remains an economic and social entity. They make hundreds of millions of dollars a year from drug trafficking, stolen cars, smuggling, blood diamonds, and other illegal operations.
Несколько сот миллионов долларов в год. Так вот, понятно, что и Израиль, контролируя, по крайней мере, временно, судя по всему, пока ситуация не стабилизируется, и не будет понятно, как далеко господин Эрдоган...
Israel temporarily controls this territory, especially those parts of Mount Hermon that are in the Syrian part of the Golan Heights. However, Israel is not going to stay there for long, much less annex this territory. As for Erdogan's statements, as you correctly note, they are most often populist. However, by making such statements, one can lose control of the situation. Having said A, at some point you will have to say B and then I. In Israel, Erdogan's statements are taken seriously. It is clear that Israel is not interested in a full-scale war with Turkey. Presumably, Turkey is not interested in it either, especially since it is a NATO country. If Turkey initiates a war with Israel, NATO will certainly not defend it. Moreover, it could lead to Turkey's quick expulsion from NATO. So to answer your question, I would estimate the probability of such a scenario at 50-50. It will become clear in the next few days how events will unfold.
просто, так сказать, достаточно быстро. Так что пока что, отвечая на ваш вопрос, подобный сценарий, его вероятность, я бы дал бы ему 50/50, но там посмотрим в ближайшие несколько дней, как будут развиваться события.
Пане Андрію, також хотів би вас запитатися, наскільки реально те, що Ердоган, в першу чергу, хотів би згадати, чи можна це розцінювати?
Putin was belittled when during the op-ed Turchtina vibed Assad via proxies.
На днях, коли от тривала операція, коли Туреччина не своїми силами, але проксі вибивала Асада, коли Асад
who went to Moscow. The Kremlin wants to get in touch with the new government, but it is difficult because Putin now has the man they wanted to capture under his thumb. The Kremlin proposes to keep the bases in Khmeimim and Tartus, even though they were bombed earlier. It looks surreal, but where am I going with this?
Хмеймімі і Тартусі, які і бомбили вас раніше. Це трошки сюрреалістично, в мене якось виглядає в голові. Але до чого я веду? От наскільки Ердоган сказав наступне, що в світі є...
Erdogan said the following: "There are only two strong, powerful, true leaders in the world, me and Putin, because I have been in power for 22 years and Putin for 25. He said this at the moment when he actually defeated Putin in Syria. It seems that he even laughed at Putin. Am I mistaken? The history between Erdogan and Putin, between Turkey and Russia, is really interesting. They are friends and brothers, straightforwardly unlikely, or they are in conflict. Like Iran, by the way. They may claim that they couldn't do it, or they were prevented by Israel. Isn't it great? Why would Israel prevent its main enemy, Iran, from fighting its own satellite? However, it seems that in this case, Russia and Turkey are interested in coming together to preserve the Russian presence in one form or another.
Надо сказать, что лично за него и его семью беспокоиться не надо. У него то ли 19, то ли 20 квартир в элитных комплексах в Москве. Плюс он, по-моему, вытащил $2 миллиарда, как говорится, из нищей... Президент нищей страны. Все как положено. Все как положено на Востоке. Но, видимо, на сегодняшний день Эрдоган является посредником между Путиным и новым правительством, вот этим вот, в основном исламистским, но не только, договариваясь о том, чтобы они согласились оставить две вот эти вот базы в Тартусе и Хмеймим за российским флотом в обмен на то, что Россия не поддержала Асада в тот момент, когда наступали повстанцы, как и Иран, кстати сказать. То есть они, как они утверждают, они не успели, или им Израиль помешал. Да, действительно странная, правда? Чего это вдруг Израиль помешал своему главному врагу в лице Ирана спасать собственного, так сказать, собственного сателлита?
It is likely that Russia's military and naval forces will remain there, plus some cover, while aviation and the main land forces will be withdrawn. Where to? Maybe to the Ukrainian front, but probably not. Today, the Israeli media published information that some of the units that were stationed there, particularly the Air Force, are planned to be transferred to Libya.
Возможно, на украинский фронт, но, скорее всего, нет. Сегодня была опубликована в израильских СМИ.
Perhaps this is the next point that the Kremlin and Moscow want to keep under their control. As you can see, it's all very fragile. It is not clear who will agree with whom. From Damascus, we hear from the leader of the new government that he is interested in rebuilding Syria. Israel has nothing to fear, is not going to have a conflict with Israel, and is not even prepared to take offense at the fact that the Israeli Air Force has destroyed virtually the entire military potential that the Assad regime had. All those gigantic weapons, tanks, airplanes, warships, weapons factories, and laboratories, including chemical weapons, were destroyed. Israel has no interest in this falling into the hands of Sunni Islamists. There are statements from Damascus that they are ready not to take offense, but they ask, guys, don't do this again. We don't interfere, you don't interfere, and we will have good neighborly relations. Believing this is like believing Hamas. The current Israeli leadership thought it could establish a non-aggression and de facto mutual recognition relationship with Hamas, And then the events of October 7th last year happened. So I would treat such statements with great caution. As for attempts by Moscow, Damascus, New Damascus, Ankara, and others to come to an agreement, it will definitely not be in Israel's favor. If they come to some kind of agreement, it is unlikely to play in favor of Israeli interests. Speaking about the new President of the United States of America, Donald Trump, who will assume his duties on June 20th, he said in an extreme interview to the question whether he considers the possibility of war with Iran, "Everything is possible. How much can we believe in that?"
Він сказав, усе можливо. Наскільки ви вірите в те, або можна вірити в те, є якісь посилання до того, що справді
that the U.S. can really help Israel in its confrontation with Iran.
Ізраїлю у протистоянні з Іраном?
It must be said that Mr. Trump has a reputation as a tough but rational politician. What he says and does, more often than not, firstly, corresponds to his intentions, and secondly, shows that these are not just figures of speech. Today, as you can see, he is returning to power under the slogan that he will try not to start wars, but to end them. Therefore, he has two main tasks: to end the war in the Middle East and to end the war in Ukraine. That is, to bring all the participants to the negotiating table. As for Ukraine, I don't have to tell you. I think you know better than I do what is really going on there. Trump's so-called plan involves freezing military action on the current front line and bringing Zelensky and Putin to talks. The main demand is concessions to Ukraine in favor of Moscow, as Putin has nowhere to rush. The situation is different in the Middle East. If Putin does not agree to Trump's terms, the U.S. will start supplying Ukraine with weapons on a large scale, and Russia will regret that it did not go for an agreement.
Политикой Соединенных Штатов будет масштабное снабжение украинских войск вооружением, и, в общем, Россия пожалеет, что они не пошли на соглашение.
In the case of Iran, this is first of all a statement along the lines of, "Look, guys, we negotiated with you, we tried to negotiate, my predecessors discussed with you curtailing your nuclear program. At that time, you were on a horse in the Middle East. You were feared. Now you see that Israel and its allies can actually do whatever they want in the skies of Syria, and not only in Syria, but also in Iran. This has already been confirmed twice. If the United States joins in, the next targets will be the facilities of your nuclear program, and at the same time your petrochemical, gas, and other industries. So perhaps you should, while they are talking to you in moderate tones, negotiate and accept the terms offered. And if not, it is exactly the same case as in the Ukrainian situation. Then, we have warned you. I think that is all we can say about this at this stage. If we talk about internal processes in Israel, please tell us to what extent Netanyahu, who is in trouble now because of the ongoing trials, to what extent he needs to continue military operations to retain power. It seems to me that the opposite is happening now. He is, shall we say, broadcasting from his office constantly the idea that Israel is on the verge of absolute victory. This is what was called absolute victory over Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, Syria, without even starting a war with it, defeated the Syrian army and so on. In fact, the Syrian army simply didn't want to fight anyone. Not the Islamists, not the pro-Turkish militias, not the pro-Iranian militias, not the Kurds, not Israel, not anyone at all. They just ran away. So I think it's extremely important for Netanyahu to stop the process today, to keep the picture of victory alive, and go to new elections with that, maybe even early elections. Then, as we understand, all his trials will become irrelevant for him. As I understand it, out of 120 seats in the Knesset, the Likud party and its allies can take 45 to 50 or even 55 seats. They won't be able to form a government, but since he is the current prime minister, his opposition won't be able to form a government without more than 60 seats either. So he will be the head of the transitional government indefinitely. It is crucial for him to ensure that there is no independent state commission of inquiry into the causes of the tragedy of last October 7. He is pushing for the creation of a political commission to be appointed by the government. The conclusions of that commission will be questionable for a great many Israelis. At this point, I think for him, if he has previously explained away the fact that he is not prepared to convene or allow the President's Supreme Court to form a commission of inquiry, because they don't do that in times of war, his critics have suggested that that's why he doesn't want to end the war. There is probably no point in procrastinating now. At this point, it's important to fix the victory picture, because it's not a given that it will continue. Look, it's agreed that Segal stays in southern Lebanon for 60 days. Those 60 days could be over in 40 days or 30 days, and Hezbollah is not really defeated, it's pushed back. Under the guise of civilians, its fighters may well return to the south. In short, it's a long story. In the Gaza Strip, Hamas's structured military system has been destroyed, but there are still all these cells that will take a very long time to dig out, to uproot. In the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria, it is not quite clear what will happen. All in all, it is very important to fix his winning status today. How he will manage to do it or not is also a good question, to which we will know the answer soon. If we talk about the fact that Trump wants to end all wars, and even he said that he talked to Netanyahu about ending the war in the Gaza Strip by June 20th, how unpleasant it is for Kahal, because to launch the liquidation of Hamas and not to complete it is roughly speaking, better not to launch it, because resources have been expended, forces have been expended, equipment has been used, and the prisoners have not yet been returned. So what do you think about stopping the operation in Gaza? You're asking questions today. Because if this was a real game, I'd be a multimillionaire by now. However, I would say that here, you see, is the story. The return of our esteemed Prime Minister's own political reputation, as it were, included a statement in the series that he is the only one in Israel who is able to resist American pressure. This has been the case all this time, as long as Joe Biden and the Democratic administration has been in power. The confrontation with the White House and the U.S. State Department, they're in constant mussel. That's the conventional wisdom, or at least that's how it's presented. Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu are sort of friends and comrades. As you realize, they are friends and comrades up to certain limits, because each leader of his country, first of all, its interests will be, and he will be interested. But a direct conflict or legal opposition to what Donald Trump will demand from him, our Prime Minister is unlikely to be interested in making public. Moreover, our Americanist commentators believe that behind the scenes, if they have a disagreement, especially, the chances of him saying no to Donald Trump if his demands are insistent are also very slim. So it is thought that no matter what, Mr. Netanyahu, one way or another, is inclined to go along with Trump's demands. Already now, the methodology is gradually beginning to change. The propaganda record is changing, so to speak. Now, the talk is that if the main objective of the war was to destroy Hamas, now the main objective is to free the hostages. If the remnants of the Hamas leadership end up taking Trump seriously, and if they end up making an agreement and releasing the hostages in exchange for their thugs, criminals, and terrorists who are sitting in Israeli prisons, there is basically a public consensus that such an exchange deal is legitimate. Practice shows that they won't get far anyway. So if he succeeds, we can say that we have won in Gaza. Actually, that's true. As I said, the structured military wing of Hamas has been destroyed. But the problem is that they have retained civilian control. They essentially control the flow of humanitarian aid. And where there's humanitarian aid, resources, there's influence. So it's not that hard for them to mobilize new volunteers, with or without quotes, into their units. There's nowhere to go anyway. The question of who's going to run Gaza the next day is a good one. But for now, it makes sense. You know, kind of like the official statement from the Prime Minister's office that we're hearing, let's finish with Hamas, and then we'll discuss who's going to run Gaza. Trump has ideas about that. We've heard from Netanyahu's team that the ideas that he's presenting now are not much different from the ideas that Biden was proposing. They were categorically unacceptable then, but now, if they become acceptable, no one will be surprised. By the way, I wanted to correct myself. Prisoners are hostages, not military hostages. They are Israeli civilians taken hostage on October 7th of last year. Mr. Zaev, thank you for talking and clarifying the situation in the Middle East. I understand that many things will become clear, and we can talk about them on January 20th. If I was too cynical, I apologize, but it's not me, it's life. Thank you very much. Let me remind our viewers, we have with us an Israeli political scientist, professor of political science at the University of Zeev Hanin. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share our conversation. My name is Ihor